Dave Maidment, who's from Leeds City Council, and he's going to tell you about a different sort of project, and one working on effectively a rival back-end product from the one we've mostly been talking about. So we've been talking about most of the projects you've seen have been based on Moran's openEHR platform, but the whole basis of openEHR is it is a vendor-neutral platform, and the specification does allow for multiple different vendors to build those. And the Leeds PHR project has come out of work started by Tony Shannon, the Ripple project. And Dave's going to talk to you about how they're going to take that forward, primarily based on an open source back-end implementation, which is API compatible with Moran, which Tony would be very happy to demonstrate to you at lunchtime, I'm sure. David.
Okay, thank you. Sure how that works, but we'll do this. Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm just conscious that I'm keeping you all between this point in time and lunch, so I guess I'm going to have to move it along a bit faster than I thought. Just by way of introduction, my name is Dave Maidment. I'm the head of IT Strategy, Architecture and Commissioning for the City of Leeds. Although I'm actually employed by the council, I'm funded by a number of partners across the city, including 4 health partners. So I'll talk about it a little bit later. It's also important before we start, and this is, just carefully look at the title there. What we're talking about today is something called a personal held record. This is not a personal health record, so you need to understand that distinction as we go through these slides. The personal held record, in our view, will hold a much richer set of information from a variety of sources that go beyond probably the conventional health record. So that's a really important distinction. Just to be clear also, before we go on to the slides, I am here today on behalf of Leeds City Council. Now the reason for that is that we are basically leading this on behalf of the city. We are funding it, so we are going to be funding that over the next 3 years using better care funding. Okay, so that's why I'm here today. The actual subject matter expert in the room is Dr. Tony Shannon, so if I get stuck, he can answer some difficult questions. Okay then, so just for the sake of clarity, the partners across the city who are engaged in this initiative are the Leeds Teaching Hospital, who you may know are probably one of the largest teaching hospital complexes in the whole of Europe, so they're hugely significant. CCGs, the Mental Health Trust, the community care people, and our own Leeds City Council social care people as well as 102 GP practices. So it's a significant footprint in terms of that. Just also, those first 4 organisations are actually funding my time, and I work with a very small but perfectly formed group of solutions architects who are actually leading on IT strategy and commissioning solutions for the collective on behalf of the whole city, not by organisation, but on behalf of the whole city. And that's another important point too. Just in terms of the priorities then, from a health perspective, and I guess these should resonate to a reasonable degree with others in the room, these are the things that we're looking to cover off. So in terms of the areas that we're going to be focusing on over the next few years, from a health perspective, these are the 4 areas. Okay, now there are other things that the council is doing on top of just health, around things like, for example, child-friendly city, around things like air pollution, around things like transport, and about resilient communities and so on, above and beyond these health considerations. Now, Leeds doesn't want to be remembered for the not-so-good things that happened back along, but it is a fact that the NHS Connected for Health function that was responsible for delivering the National Programme for IT back in 2005 were based in Leeds. That's a fact. It's also a fact that despite that pretty bad headline, some good things came out of that. So for example, EPR systems in GP practices, things like Choose and Book, things like the Health Spine, for example, were probably good examples of deliverables, whereas some of these monolithic things clearly failed. You're probably aware that NHS England are based in Leeds as well. There's a big building in the middle of Leeds called Quarry House, which some people affectionately, I guess, associate with the Kremlin. They associate with the Kremlin, I think, more because of the physical building looks rather than what goes on in there, I'm pretty sure. NHS Digital are also based in Leeds, so that's an important thing to think about. And above and beyond that, we have literally hundreds of small digital companies who are working on a whole range of applications and systems, many of which relate to health and care. So it's not unusual then, and it's not unreasonable for why this particular initiative, the Personal Held Record, should be coming out of Leeds. That makes reasonable sense. Okay, this is a fairly general statement of how we see the health IT market. It's not just a health market, it could easily be local government as well. Typically what you've got there on the left-hand side is the usual plethora of lots and lots of small systems, repositories of information that store valuable health and care information across many organisations. On the right there, you've typically got the kinds of things that did come out of the National Programme for IT, the huge monolithic applications, and then sat in the middle is really where we started to be quite innovative in terms of introducing an architecture that started to bring information together in a modern way. So that was probably where we started to make a difference. And that leads us nicely onto something called the Leeds Care Record. Now, the Leeds Care Record is not the Personal Health Record. I'm going to come on to that in a number of slides along. But the Leeds Care Record started life back in 2012. Is that correct? Yeah, that's correct. And it did draw in information from primary care systems, secondary care systems, from community health, from mental health, and from our own adult social care systems as well. And it was quite unique in that sense, in as much as it did bring all that information together, and for the very first time gave practitioners, you know, that single view of an individual in a much broader sense, people they were dealing with. So just to say that Leeds Care Record also now, I think, is being used by 4,500 practitioners across the city today, which includes 102 GP practices. So it's got a significant foothold, and it's viewed as being significantly successful. Here's one example of a screen relating to, I think, a single patient. What you can see there is you can take a number of perspectives on that patient. So you can get a hospital view. If you look at the tabs across the top there, you can hospital view, a GP view of the world, a mental health view of the world, you know, so on and so forth. But it's drawn all that information in real time. Is it real time, or is it pretty much the night before? Yeah, it's real time. So this is real time information that's been drawn in. So there's an example of an individual patient. Now this one is another example of a screen in that system that's very well received, because for the first time GPs could see where their patients were in the hospitals. There are apocryphal stories, at least I don't know whether they're apocryphal or not, of GPs going out and knocking on people's doors, you know, and they're not actually in the house, they're in the hospital, and they don't even know that. So this was quite enlightening, you know, in terms of giving them, you know, that great overview of actually where their patients were at a point in time. Okay, so the natural progression then from that was that the Leeds Care Record captured many people's imagination, not unreasonably, and therefore what was required then was, you know, how could organisations learn from that great work that had been done in Leeds? And the way that was done was that a group of people called the Integration Pioneers, some of you may be aware of the Integration Pioneers, supported by Leeds City Council, submitted a bid into NHS England under something called the Tech Fund 2 initiative, and we got some fairly significant funding to develop an open version of the Leeds Care Record, in essence. Okay, so subsequently Ripple was, well, it was actually called Ripple Open Source at the time, I think. The Ripple Open Source Initiative was set up back in 2015, following the council's or the city's principle of simplifying, standardising and sharing. Okay, that was the mantra that it followed. Okay, there were 6 basic component parts to that. The first part was based on something we call open requirements. What I mean by open requirements really is a business case template that will give people the opportunity to make the case for introducing this kind of capability. Okay, and it was there as an open product, and it's there right now, and anybody can use it. Open governance was there it was a series of templates, really focusing on things like information governance that could help remove some of the barriers that you can imagine, you know, to making something like this happen. So again, useful stuff. And then the final part, something we called Open Citizen, was really white labeling some of the materials that we'd used in the hospital, because that's where the product came from. The Leeds Care Record came from. White labeling some of those products, those marketing materials, those training materials, in order to make that available in a more open way. Here's a little bit of architecture stuff, just in terms of how we went about making an open version of effective Leeds Care Record. It did start off, I think, as one single technology platform, and I think Morand, actually some of the Morand technology was used for that. But in more recent times, we decided to break it up into 3 component parts. And the reason we've done that, of course, is that people may well choose to pick and mix what they want. So they may want the open UI, or they may want the open middleware bit, or they may want the back end, which of course is Ethosys and openEHR based. So just to go through those very quickly then, the UI is based on a technology called Qt, which is a lightweight, and I don't mean lightweight in as much as it doesn't do anything. I mean lightweight in as much as obviously its physical footprint is quite low. And that's an enterprise framework called PulseTile. Sorry, I'm a bit muddled up here, but PulseTile is the interface framework that we are now using. The middleware piece is based on something called Qt. Sorry, I got a bit mixed up there, which is the lightweight enterprise-ready integration framework to help bring the information together from those various systems. And then finally, the back-end bit, which is the bit that you're probably most interested in, given that it's based on openEHR standards, is a product called Ethosys. And I think the important thing there is that Ethosys is the very first open source implementation of openEHR. Is that correct? Yeah, okay. So the important thing is that all this work and all this documentation is now available, or has been available for some time, basically as Apache 2 open source, with a view that it can be reused, you know, it can be enhanced, and of course it can be supported. So, I mean, that, which is the whole principle behind the open approach. The Ripple Foundation is now a not-for-profit company called a community interest company, so it's moved on from being Ripple open source to being this community interest company. And the important thing is its long-term ambition is to support these kinds of developments. Okay. So here's some, I guess, equivalent versions. I won't labour them too long, but you can see clearly that this is a similar kind of representation to the slide I showed you earlier on that was using the Leeds Care Record, except it's using PulseTile as the front end. You've got a single view of a patient there. So there you can see the equivalence. Here's another example. This is stuff that's real, which gives us obviously a listing of people by age range. These are just some sample screens from the equivalent of Leeds Care Record, but in open source. And then here's another one that's basically showing people's vital signs. I mean, I'm no medical practitioners, but 45 beats per minute doesn't look good to me. I don't know. So, right. So what is apparent in all of this, I guess, is that clearly these open platforms transform, okay? I mean, put bluntly, I guess these platforms generally transform. So we've got many examples of that out there in the wider world. So as well as the Android platform, which is clearly an open platform, we've got other platforms. For example, in the banking world, we've got things like PayPal. Again, that's a platform, but it's not an open platform, but it's a platform. And these things, you know, are transforming the world. We've got other things like, for example, travel and leisure with companies like Uber, Airbnb. And of course, in the social media world, we've got Facebook and Twitter. So it's clear that these platforms are transforming, you know, the world. And what we see is that shouldn't, you know, health and care should not be an exception. And what we strive to do here is create a platform that is going to change the health and care world. Okay. I'm not going to go through each of these individually. This should all make sense. But I think the key point that comes out of this is these open platform principles have been agreed right across the organisations that make up the city. And if you think about that, that's pretty remarkable. You know, to get buy-in, we hope it's not just lip service, but to get actual buy-in to these principles across the whole city and across all those different organisations, and hopefully being able to persuade the supplier community that this is the right thing to do, I think is a significant win actually for the city. Hopefully those make sense. I don't have to go through them all individually. We can do at some point after this if we need to, but all those things stand and they have been bought into as a collective, which is good. So right onto the main event then, very quickly, the person held record. So the great thing about the Leeds Person Held Record is that it does present that opportunity now, really, for these open principles truly to be put to the test. Okay, that's our view of it. In terms of basically what it's going to cover off in year one, what I alluded to right at the start is this is not just about health, but so if you look at that left column, what you can see there is this is covering a whole spectrum of information sources. It's taking information from health, it's taking information from care systems, it's taking information about your well-being, which may be coming from things like apps, your own personal apps, and it's also taking things like local government information. So it might be taking things like not just social care information, it's probably taking things like housing information and so on. So it gives a much broader spectrum for the individual, because this is about something that the individual themselves will access, a much richer spectrum of information than you would probably traditionally find in just a health record. In terms of year one and some of the things we're going to be doing, well, the Leeds Care record is still seen for us as an essential source of information. So the personal health record will be taking that information out of the Leeds Care record as a starting point, using that middleware product that we talked about earlier, Q'd. And that includes things like problems, medications, allergies, vaccinations and letters. It's also going to be storing some other things too. So for example, I'm not sure what we all think about this one actually, but the top three things that people might need to know about me. I'm not quite sure. I mean, that is free text stuff actually, but you know, what we did do right at the start of all of this is we did ask people themselves, you know, we asked the community what they might want from a Leeds Person Held Record, and this was something that they notified us that was important. Contact details, well, that makes perfect sense, things like address, but also the names of people who you might want to contact, key contacts, and of course accessibility standards are going to be important in all of this. That stuff on the right, it will be built, I guess, on the basis of privacy by design. You know, so people have already flagged that privacy is hugely important in all of this, as you might expect. It is going to be cloud-based. It is going to be using things like GovVerify. I'll come on to that in a moment. And it is going to be running over our secure networks, HSCN and YHPSN. Okay, I did allude to this. You know, we did go out there and we did ask people what they wanted. So we had a series of engagement workshops last year, both with citizens and frontline staff, and we asked them, you know, what were their aspirations and what were their considerations. So, you know, back to some of the failures in the past, if you think about, you know, some of those failures that we talked about back in 2005 with these monolithic systems, very little consultation done. You know, very little consultation with clinicians, practitioners, and, you know, people on the ground, the citizens themselves. So this seeks to change all of that. So we've done all that kind of good stuff. We did publish the outcomes of all that in something we call our Joined Up Leeds initiative. We had very positive feedback, and you can see there from the slides the kind of things that people were saying, which means they really did think about it. And as I said before, one of the key things that came out of it is that they wanted this thing to be secure. So, you know, security, that approach of privacy by design is critical in all of this. So, just not many more to go now. GovVerify, we are going to use GovVerify. I guess people in the room are acquainted with GovVerify. GovVerify is now being used by central government departments quite extensively. So things like HMRC, Passport Agency, and so on are using this extensively, and therefore it's our intention to use GovUK Verify as well, actually. So in terms of where do we start then? We start really with a cohort of people, probably 300 people, and we're picking diabetes as the focus group. As I said before, you know, the approach will be user-centric. We will be involving the users in the design of this product. That's important, both in terms of how does it actually deal with their conditions and challenges, but also, you know, how easy is it going to be to use? So things like this are critically important. If it's not intuitive and it's not easy, then I guess people are not going to use it. So we'll be certainly focusing on their views and opinions as we go along. Just finally, and I suppose nearly finally, just for the sake of completeness, this does align with all our local and I guess some of the regional and national strategies. So, you know, it does align well with those. That's important. And then finally, this is one of Tony's slides, actually. The adventure begins. So we don't underestimate the challenges along the way. You know, this is not going to be easy over the next 3 years. Year one is probably going to be the hardest of all in terms of getting some momentum. But in conclusion, aside from the transformation and improved care outcomes we expect to see in time through this initiative, by taking this open platform approach and ensuring technology and vendor neutrality, which we've talked about before, we believe we can free the data and share the benefits for the greater good. So there you go.
Andy, can I ask you to come up and get set up? While Andy's getting set up, we'll just take one question. We have a panel session this afternoon, obviously lots of time to chat over lunch, but we do have a panel session specifically set aside where we can have more detailed questions. Roland.
Thank you, very interesting talk. I was just, my question is actually about governance. I was wondering, is there a challenge in governance? If there is, what's the challenge and how it's being tackled? You did mention the open governance templates and things. Yeah, sorry. So I'll repeat the question again. Yes, the question was interesting talk. The question was about governance. I was wondering, do you see a challenge in governance? If there is, what's the challenge and how are you addressing these things? You did mention open governance.
Yeah, well, Tony, maybe Tony may elaborate, but for sure, we've been here before with some of this governance stuff. So if you think about the Leeds Care Record, if you can imagine the challenges of getting 6, 7 different organisations to pull together and agree, you know, to remove some of those information sharing barriers, then, you know, that was a huge win for the city, and we did that a number of years ago. Now, we don't underestimate what's going to happen going forwards in terms of challenges around the personal health record, but having removed those barriers once, we think we're well set to obviously proceed, and we'll have similar arrangements in place for the future. Do you want to elaborate, Tony, at all?
Well, we'll add one line. You ask, is there a challenge with governance? There's always a challenge with governance.
Thanks. So while Andy's getting set up, I'll just, he's CIO at Plymouth NHS Trust and has been on an